So yesterday, Andrew Yang shared a chart which he suggests makes him the #1 Democratic primary candidate in terms of small donor support. But I want to take a few minutes to explore this chart with you and explain why Yang's interpretation is misleading at best and likely false at worst. So this chart was shared by Andrew Yang and many of his supporters all over social media for the last day or so, because he feels it makes him out to be the #1 candidate for small donor support. Small donors love Andrew Yang more than they love Bernie Sanders even, according to this chart. But we really need to dig in to explore the problematic nature of that claim. So first, we have to distinguish between Yang's tweet and the chart itself. Yang's tweet says he's #1 in small donors, but the chart is quite clear in suggesting it's the percentage of your donations based on their origin. So for instance, this shows that Andrew Yang has a slightly higher percentage of small donors than Bernie Sanders as a proportion of their total donors. And so does Julian Castro as well. But what's not shown here is that Bernie Sanders has many times the amount of donors and the amount of donations that Andrew Yang has. And of course, that means that Bernie Sanders is still well ahead when it comes to the raw amount of people making small donations. Andrew Yang might be able to make a nebulous claim to say a greater proportion of his donors are small donors, but that doesn't make him #1 among small donors. Not even close. Bernie Sanders is the undisputed champion of getting millions and millions of regular working class Americans to give him small donations of $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $30 or whatever. He is the only one doing that on a mass scale. And even still, despite having a much larger campaign, his proportion of small donors to large donors is rather similar to Andrew Yang's, which is quite impressive because when you scale campaigns, often they scale in part because of increased reliance on larger donations from wealthy people and well-off people and even upper middle class people. And Bernie Sanders has been able to show that you can run a primary contending campaign, not just, an issues-based campaign, off small donors primarily. But there's another factor here which really needs to be explored, and it's the category of transfers. Now, in this chart, transfers are marked off as a distinct category from all the rest, and that's basically money from previous campaigns by that particular candidate. And here it's noted as distinct from all the other categories, meaning that that money by default is not counted as small donor money. But here's the thing, much of Bernie Sanders' fundraising in previous campaigns also came from small donors, right? Like Bernie Sanders in 2016 when he ran against Hillary Clinton, for instance, had a small donor, average campaign contribution as well. I think it's lower this time, but it was like $27 back in the 2015-2016 primary season, which of course means that the average Bernie donor back then was a small donor as well. So when you count transfer money in, you have to either find a way to discern the percentage of that transfer money, which was big donor transfer money and small donor transfer money, or you have to exclude it from this proportional calculation. Because if you can't be sure if it's big or small or anything else, you have to exclude it. So for this chart to suggest that all of Bernie Sanders' transfer money was by default not small donor money is misleading. And if you take a similar percentage, it's likely the case that Bernie Sanders not only has more small donors than Andrew Yang, which is very clear, but that his proportion of small donors is likely the highest out of all the candidates, including Julian Castro and including Andrew Yang. That's the fact of the matter here, that whether we look at the most important issue, which is who racks up the most individual small donors, it's Bernie by a landslide, or whether we look at the fact that when you really dig into what this transfer money was, a good chunk of it at least was likely small donor money, Bernie is still the king of representing regular working class people. I know the Yang Gang has a lot of young, idealistic, energetic supporters, and I know a lot of them in their hearts want to do the right thing for the country. But I have to say, at the end of the day, you don't actually represent small donors to the extent Bernie Sanders does. He's the undisputed champion of that. And Andrew Yang sharing charts like this, trying to claim that title disingenuously, actually hurts his cause. If Andrew Yang wanted to share this and make it very clear that he's among the leaders in small donor percentage, that's fine. You might also say that the chart itself makes it very clear, so Andrew Yang doesn't need to note that specifically in his tweet. But Andrew Yang's tweet does clearly say #1 in small donors. And I don't think that's an accurate claim. And a lot of the Yang Gang people recirculating this chart and recirculating Andrew Yang's claim are not putting the caveat in. They're saying Andrew Yang #1 in small donors, which is not true. And again, I have to underline this. You can't just count transfers by default as not small donor money. That's not accurate. Hypothetically, if Andrew Yang runs for president next time and has some money left over, are you going to assume that all of that money was big donor money or was neither small nor big donor money, when you know reasonably so that Andrew Yang does indeed get a large amount of his money from small donors? He should be commended. He's among the leaders in that category, but he's not quite there.